So now we're moving into chapter 6, and this first portion is covering section 6-3 and focuses on biodiversity. So biodiversity is defined as the total of the genetically based varieties of all organisms in the biosphere. So we think our bio, our life, so diversity of life. It's based on all of the varieties of organisms. So what's the point of biodiversity? Why are we even talking about biodiversity? Biodiversity is one of the Earth's greatest natural resources. So species of many kinds have provided us humans with food, industrial products, medicines, painkillers, antibiotics, that type of thing. So as the human population, biodiversity is extremely important to us because it provides us with a lot of different things. And we're going to talk about some of the issues with biodiversity in the world currently and how humans play a role in that biodiversity. But first we're just going to touch base about different types of diversity. So biodiversity is the total genetic based varieties of all organisms. But we also have ecosystem diversity, and that's just variety of habitats. So think of all of these variety of habitats. So you guys did your biome project, and this would be kind of one piece of that, of what types of variety of habitats, because again, that's going to influence the organisms that are living in those habitats. Species diversity just plays a role with that, and this is the number of different species. And the last one is genetic diversity. And this refers to the total of all the different forms of genetic information carried by organisms. Total sum of all genetic information. And as we get further into the chapter, we'll talk a little bit more about each of these. But the main focus is the biodiversity, and these are kind of three components within that. So now we're going to talk about threats to biodiversity. Human activity can actually reduce biodiversity. And when we talk about reducing biodiversity, the big piece of this is extinction. We're going to talk about that in the next slide, but we want to look at kind of how are different ways that humans are influencing this biodiversity and possibly causing extinction. So the first one is altering habitats. Then we're going to look at hunting species to extinction, introduction of toxic compounds into food webs, and the last one is introducing foreign species to new environments. So when we talk about extinctions, again, this is reducing the biodiversity. And when we look at this, extinction occurs when a species disappears from part or all of its range. Current extinctions are often a result of human activities. So let's look a little bit about this. Again, we've heard of things being extinct, like our little friend, the dodo bird here. The dodo bird. Again, so it disappears basically from the biosphere. And generally, currently, these are caused by human activities. There are things in the past, changes in environment, changes in different organisms and whatnot that have caused some other birds to go, or other organisms to go extinct. But generally, the extinctions caused now are caused by us, humans. Another definition that we're just going to look at is an endangered species. So these are when the species population decreases to a point where it's a danger of becoming extinct. And we think of the bald eagle as this is something that was an endangered species and now kind of moving off that endangered species list. So these are different kind of specific definitions that are going to limit biodiversity. So let's start talking now about the 4 ways that humans are playing a role in biodiversity. So the first one, habitat alteration. Habitat alteration involves the changing of natural habitat, and it can occur when land is developed, destroyed, or resources within the habitat are limited. Again, humans are usually to blame. When they're not to blame, we would think of more of like natural disasters, like a lava flow, or something like that is going to change it, but generally, we're to blame. Habitat fragmentation. This is when habitats are split into different pieces and causes habitats to become biological islands. So we can think back to if some area is developed, we think of the country. Lots of people want to move out into the country, and we get these little pockets of development and that type of thing. And what happens is the natural habitat that an organism has lived in is no longer the size it was, but also the population is kind of, or the species are all separated now. So you're going to have different kind of pockets of that habitat, and they're fragmented from one another. So we think back to different things of how that's going to affect. The resources are affected. Predator-prey, competition, all of that type of thing. So here is just kind of an example of habitat fragmentation when we look at the development of different parts of areas, farming, that type of thing. We now have areas that before used to be kind of our wonderful open areas, a habitat where species could move pretty freely, to something that is pretty clearly segmented. So whether there be fences, roads, building sites, that type of thing, the habitat that was once available to all the species is now kind of compartmentalized, so in a different sections. Think of New York City. Central Park is this kind of grassy area with trees and water features and all that type of stuff, and it is surrounded by concrete. So anytime a habitat at one point had access to the entire area and be able to freely move, that no longer happens. And generally, again, has to do with human causes, building roads, sectioning different things off, communities, towns, that type of thing. So the second way that humans are influencing biodiversity is the demand for wildlife products. And this is using organisms for human use and or consumptions. So we have deforestation, something like this, for farming purposes. Hunting and trapping, we think of the pelts of a lot of different animals. Hunting in regards to providing food for ourselves. Now we also have poaching, so we think of the rhinoceros, and the horns of the rhinoceros are very valuable. They're used for medicinal purposes, that type of thing. And so demand for specific products is causing issues with biodiversity because we are changing their habitat, we are decreasing the population to an extent where it can no longer recover, and a lot of this is kind of hard to control and maybe difficult to enforce. So we're going to pick up in the next section starting with the third one. So this ends the video notes for the first part of chapter 6.